Alright, so we are almost done with the photosynthesis part, but yeah, of course, we are going to do our respiration now. Photosynthesis a little bit is left out, which I'm going to take up in the class itself. Now, to begin with respiration, as you can see, I've written on the screen. This Lavoisier was the first person to actually observe the entire phenomena of respiration, that is cellular respiration, the one that is happening in vivo. Okay, that means inside the cells. All right, so respiration, since we are doing plant physiology, let me just give you a note at the beginning only that in animals the respiration that is taking place is quite similar to that of plants itself. All right, so at many points there'll be a lot of similarity. Whenever there'll be a point of difference, I'll let you know. Okay, I'll be keen to prompt it out to you. Okay, now the thing is, this question had come once in the exam, that who first discovered the phenomena of external respiration. So external respiration is basically the exchange of respiratory gases, that means O2 and CO2, that happens between the organism and the surroundings. That's quite easy, and you already know that. He extensively studied, but in case of animals, okay, Lavoisier. All right, so he found that organisms take in oxygen and they give out CO2 and H2O. All right, now depending upon the habitat, the exchange of gases can be with liquid or gaseous environment. Okay, so it is not wrong to say that respiration is a kind of combustion reaction, chemically speaking. Okay, combustion reaction. So combustion reactions are generally exothermic reactions or endothermic reactions. Overall there is a net release of energy. All right, overall there is a net release of energy. Okay, so where were we? Yeah, so combustion reaction, this respiration is a kind of combustion reaction. More properly, if I want to say, it is a type of exergonic reaction. It is a type of right. So exergonic meaning a little bit of energy will be released in the entire process, and respiration is actually a process which helps it is one of the catabolic systems inside the cell, which meets the energy requirements of the cell. All right, so in the next slide I'll be taking up let me take up these two graphs. All right, these two graphs. Right, in the cell, enzymes catalyze each reaction step, reducing the activation energy and making it easier for the cell to undergo aerobic cellular respiration. So we are talking about cellular respiration out here. Two types of cellular respiration actually exist, aerobic and anaerobic. You already know that. In this particular chapter, we'll be taking both, but first let's deal up with the aerobic cellular respiration, right? So you can see how much of the energy is released. 3012 kilojoule per mole of energy is released. 34% of it is trapped in the form of ATP, and the rest is lost as heat and light. Okay, this is very important. 34% of the total energy released during the net aerobic cellular respiration is actually 3012 kilojoule per mole, but 34% of it is trapped in the form of ATP, which can be used as the energy currency of the cell, and the rest is lost, okay, as heat and light. Now the thing is, out here there are two graphs, A and B. The first graph is combustion of glucose in a test tube, so this one is in vitro, right? And the next one is in vivo, which is actually respiration happening. You see these bumps out here? These bumps are nothing but a series of reactions, right? Okay, each with a relatively small activation energy, right? The entire graph, the exergonic graph that you see out here, this energy profile, is actually broken down into smaller parts out here in respiration. So this is very clever design adapted by our cell, okay, so that inside our cells the energy release can take place. All right, so as you can see, glucose has a lot of CC bonds and energy is trapped inside them. So in undergoing these series of small chemical reactions which have small activation energies, all right, the cell actually produces some amount of energy in the form of ATP. Okay, see, free energy transferred via energy carrier molecules such as ATP. Alright, so cellular respiration done and the combustion done. The difference is already seen. Yes. Now let's look at the types of respiration. The types of respiration. The respiration can be divided into many parts. All right, on the basis of different parameters, we can actually describe respiration in a lot of you can categorize respiration in a lot of ways. All right, this what you see on the screen is your protoplasmic respiration and the floating respiration. Right, protoplasmic respiration means you will be using up proteins, okay, um, or you might also, yeah, that's it. You will protoplasmic means protein. You will use protein as the substrate. That means you are going to do the breakdown of proteins, okay, but proteins are rarely stored in cells. Yes or no? Right. So cellular proteins are being used up by the protoplasmic respiration. All right, and if you talk about the floating respiration, this question had come. You can use fats, okay, you can use fats or carbs, right? Carbs like starch, okay, glucose, these things you can use. In case of animals, glycogen, these things you can use. All right, so this is about, and obviously this categorization, protoplasmic and floating respiration, is being done on the basis of the substrates that respiration is using. Okay, so when are fats used in respiration? Fats are used generally when carbohydrate supply is exhausted, right? Fats are generally stored in the adipocytes, used up when the carbohydrate supply is exhausted, right? Muscles, however, they are an exception. They can they actually prefer fatty acids over carbohydrates, okay, for respiration. So what happens in that case? The fats, they are actually first converted down into what? They are converted down into glycerol, and then into fatty acid. Glycerol, right? And then into you can say glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate, right? From fats, they can also be converted into fatty acids in case the fat is the fat chain is too long. If the alkyl chain is too long, in that case, the fatty acids, it breaks down into smaller fatty acids, so glycerol, and as a result it can be converted into glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate. And fatty acids, on the other hand, they can undergo beta oxidation, right? Fatty acids can undergo beta oxidation, and as a result they provide what? They provide acetyl CoA. Acetyl CoA can then go through the Krebs cycle and produce NADH2 and FADH2, which can undergo the ETC, and then ATP synthesis can occur. So this is the overall you can say this is the overall reaction mechanism. All right, now if you're done with this, let's talk about the proteins also. Proteins are rich. Proteins, where do you find mostly? They are found in seeds. Okay, they are found in seeds. So proteins are actually, whenever a cell is putting its protein resources into use, that means it has been exhausted of all its carbohydrates as well as fat resources. Okay, so what happens? Proteins are actually first hydrolyzed into amino acids. So if we talk about the proteins, they are first hydrolyzed into amino acids, and then the amino acids can be deaminated, okay, to produce the amino acids are deaminated to produce the organic acids. Okay, now once the organic acids are formed, they might enter the respiratory pathway directly or through the formation of acetyl CoA. Okay, so this acetyl CoA is a very important part. Okay, all right. Now, next topic that we are going to study is respiratory quotient and its importance. What is the respiratory quotient? Respiratory quotient, as you might know, we can define RQ as the volume of CO2 liberated. That means how much amount of CO2 has been, you can say, generated per volume of O2 consumed. Okay, volume of O2 consumed, as simple as that. Okay, Now the thing is that why is this RQ important? Okay, why is this RQ important? It gives information about many things. Okay, it gives us information about whether the respiration that is undergoing in a particular cell is aerobic or is it anaerobic. Okay, is it aerobic or is it anaerobic? Okay, then this is the first information that RQ gives. The second information is about what kind of a substrate is used. Okay, the substrate type. It gives us information about the substrate type, right? Then the third thing that is obviously directly evident from the substrate type, if you are able to analyze what substrate type is it that a particular plant cell or animal cell is using for your respiration, then you can say if normal nutrition is being taken up by the plant or animal, or is it in a starvation condition. All right, so normal nutrition or starvation, this information also you can derive from RQ. All right, the other informations, there are a lot many other informations, but one more that might deserve you can say mention is about what kind of food transformations is taking place. That means how much amount of fat is being synthesized, like synthesis of fats. Okay, then other interconversions like fats being converted into carbs. These food transformations, basically food transformations, these things can be taken out or derived from analyzing the RQ, respiratory quotient, okay, of a particular cell. Now this RQ can actually be analyzed over a cell or over a tissue or over an organ or over the organism itself. Okay, this ratio can be broadened. All right, now respiratory quotient value, if we talk about the range of the value, it can be unity also, more than 1 also, less than 1 also, 0 also, infinity also. Okay, so let's take it from RQ equals to unity. If it is unity, that means if RQ is unity, that means aerobic respiration is going on. Okay, and that too using carbohydrates, carb as the substrate, respiratory substrate. Like if we look at the example C6 or the reaction C6H12O6, right, plus 6O2, this gives 6CO2 plus 6H2O. Yes, so from here we can write that RQ equals to amount of CO2 liberated, 6 units of CO2 divided by O2 consumed, that is 6 units, so it is 1. So whenever you're using carbohydrate and it is an aerobic reaction, then you can say RQ will be equal to 1. Very important. All right, let me just erase the screen out. Let's take the second case. The second case is when RQ is less than 1. Okay, now RQ being less than 1 also comes in sub cases. If it is aerobic respiration and it is the respiration fats is being used as the respiratory substrates, then you will use RQ. Your RQ will come out to be 0.71. If it is proteins, then your RQ will come out to be 0.7 to 0.9. Now you might notice that for your proteins the RQ is greater, and for the fats it is lower, I mean relatively. Yes, so obviously it is the ratio of the CO2 liberated by amount of oxygen consumed, right? So in proteins more amount of CO2 liberation takes place and lesser per unit O2 consumed, amount of O2 consumed. Okay, so this both of these cases are of aerobic respiration. Next, when RQ is more than 1, right, greater than 1, so this also aerobic respiration, but when organic acids are used as respiratory substances. Let me just give an example. Like for example 2CH2O4, this is what? C2H2O4 is oxalic acid. Okay, oxalic acid, right? Now the oxalic acid, what happens? Oxalic acid, when you react it with oxygen, 4CO2 is released, and as a result your H2O is also released, 2H2O is released. Alright, so CO2 by O2 if you do, then you will see 4:1 ratio coming out. Yes, so it is greater than 1. Okay, now let's talk about RQ being infinity. RQ being infinity. This actually is recorded in case of anaerobic respiration. Okay, that means CO2 is evolved. Alright, CO2 is evolved, but then there's no consumption of O2 taking place. Simple enough. Like for example, O2 consumption will not take place. Alright, so aerobic respiration, in anaerobic respiration, your RQ comes out to be infinity. Okay, now the thing is, this kind of thing is seen in alcoholic fermentation. Let's just take an example. Many industrial processes are there where the RQ is infinity. Many. I'll be sending you a particular picture, okay, from a book, the industrial applications of anaerobic respiration, and you can just go through it. Okay, that is important. And all the bacteria that are used industrially, that is also important. Alright, now the last case, which is RQ is 0, right? Total 5 cases we saw. This is the last case. RQ is 0. So RQ being 0 means that CO2 evolution is 0, but O2 will be consumed. Right? This happens in case of succulent plants, like for example Opuntia. Alright, that means all the CO2 that has been produced during respiration is fixed internally by photosynthesis, and that happens during day. Succulents during day only, right? Carbon fixation occurs during day only. So in that case your RQ comes out to be 0. So you can write it down in succulent plants. Okay, example is Opuntia. Alright, so all the CO2 that has been produced by respiration, all of it has been internally used or fixed through photosynthesis. Okay, so this is done. Alright, let's move on. So see, aerobic respiration, that is the first case that we'll be dealing with. Now aerobic respiration involves the conversion of these organic materials, right, into what is the intermediate out here? The pyruvate, right? This pyruvate can either be directly used to give ATP, or it can go through several processes like Krebs cycle, electron transport chain, oxidative phosphorylation, and then finally it gets converted into ATP. Alright, obviously in Krebs cycle also we get ATP synthesis, right? As you can see, at the end we have water coming out, yes, and CO2 also coming out, right? So CO2, water, and ATP, these are the 3 byproducts of aerobic respiration. Alright, okay, things are not as simple as I'm making it sound out here. Let's try to understand in more detail. Okay, aerobic respiration is actually the more common form of respiration. Okay, and what can I say? The glycolysis is the first stage. Glycolysis is obviously the first stage. So let's just dive into glycolysis. Before that, let's also talk about the anaerobic respiration pathways. Anaerobic respiration, it involves famous things like fermentation, right? Fermentation is such a important industrial, you can say, method. Lot of things are produced industrially or for commercial use, like cheese. I mean, that you love in your pizza, right? Cheese. I especially love yogurt. I love yogurt. So bread, wine, right? Some of the drugs, yes. Vitamin C, in fact, is also produced. Okay. Now, you might have heard about sorbitol. Sorbitol is actually used for the production of vitamin C. Alright, so I'll be sending you the list. Alright, so let's actually look into a little bit of anaerobic respiration before we dive into glycolysis. Alright, so anaerobic respiration has limited products in the sense you can't actually produce everything from anaerobic respiration, but then there are it involves a huge array of products, but we will be studying about ethyl alcohol, which is actually the alcoholic fermentation, and the lactic acid. Okay, these two are actually quite important for us. So lactic acid, the formula you need to know, lactic acid is C3H6O3. This is lactic acid. Ethyl alcohol, you already know the formula, right? So in microorganisms, the term anaerobic respiration is replaced by fermentation. Okay, so whenever your respiration is taking place in the absence of oxygen in the cell, then you can say it's anaerobic respiration. But in microorganism, it is termed as, the process is termed as fermentation. All right. So this was actually this term fermentation was actually given by Cruikshank in 1897. Okay, so I'll just write the name, since in NEET people ask about these names. Cruikshank in 1897. All right. Actually, Buckner, you might have heard about Buckner. In 1897 itself, Buckner, he conducted his study on yeast. Okay, and he found out that yeast extract could carry out fermentation of sugar solution. Okay, so if you have a yeast extract and you have a sugar solution, then fermentation is carried out. Fermentation happens. All right. So obviously there must be some factor which is carrying out the fermentation. Yes, there must be some factor which is carrying out the fermentation in the yeast. Now that factor was actually an enzyme complex. Okay, and that was termed as zymase. So this is very important. Okay, now fermentation is obviously the anaerobic breakdown of the carbohydrates, right, and also other organic compounds. You can form alcohol, you can form organic acids, right? Either you can use the microorganisms or you can use extracted enzymes from their bodies. Yes. So anaerobic respiration, if you talk about the energy release, energy output of anaerobic respiration, obviously it is lower, right? Energy output of anaerobic respiration is actually lower than that of the aerobic. No surprise, right? It's not a surprise. Why is it so though? Why is it so? Because of a lot of reasons. Actually, there is incomplete breakdown of the respiratory substrate. Okay, there will be incomplete breakdown. All right, like the final broken down, you can say, component of the initial starting material or the substrate should be CO2 and H2O. But then anaerobic respiration actually stops at ethyl alcohol or lactic acid, these things. So it is incomplete, right? Right? So moreover, in anaerobic respiration, at least one of the products is a organic acid. Like for example, lactic acid. This is an organic acid. This can actually be further oxidized, right, to give energy. Right, this can further be oxidized. So obviously, your anaerobic respiration is going to be producing lesser energy, right? Moreover, sometimes during glycolysis, one of the products which is formed is NADH2. This is used up. You actually have to provide this as an input to your anaerobic respiration phenomena in some cases. Okay, and obviously in many of the cases ATP formation does not occur during the regeneration of NAD+. Moreover, the electron transport chain, right, is absent. Yes, and the oxygen is not used. It is not used for receiving the electrons and the protons. So all these things, this ETC, O2 receiving the electrons and the protons, all of these, NADH2 formation, all of these things actually led to the production of ATP, extra ATP. Okay, so obviously anaerobic respiration, to sum it up, anaerobic respiration will have a lesser amount of energy production or energy yield as compared to aerobic respiration, right? Now let's look at the present slide, the slide that we have right now. The slide is that of fates of glucose. Now glucose can actually, in respiration, the most common you can say respiratory substrate is the glucose. Yes, now glucose can go for storage as glycogen, starch, or sucrose, right? The glucose, the same glucose, can actually undergo the pentose phosphate pathway, which is also called PPP, which you have not studied till now, I guess. Hexose monophosphate pathway, right? It has got lots of names. So ribose 5 phosphate is the ultimate product in this, right? R5P, right? Don't confuse it with ribulose 5 phosphate. No, no. Okay, this is ribose 5 phosphate. Okay, ribulose 5 phosphate is an intermediate in the path of ribose 5 phosphate formation. Then it can actually form pyruvate. Yes, oxidation via glycolysis, right? So these are the, you can say, pathways by which glucose utilization actually takes place inside our body. Let's look at the fates of pyruvate. So the pyruvate so formed after glucose undergoes glycolysis, which actually comprises of the 10 different reactions. 2 molecules of pyruvate is formed, right? Now this pyruvate can form ethanol, anaerobic respiration. It can form lactate, anaerobic respiration again, which is called fermentation, right? This is alcoholic fermentation, right, producing ethanol. Lactate formation actually occurs in the muscles, right, and also in erythrocyte, right? Now under aerobic conditions, these were the hypoxic or anaerobic conditions. Under aerobic conditions, what happens? You actually, this pyruvate undergoes oxidation to form 2 molecules of acetyl CoA. Okay, in this process coenzyme A is used up, and CO2 is released. What else is used up in this process? In this process, your NADH, okay, NAD plus, this thing is also reduced to NADH plus H plus, NADH plus H plus. Okay, all right. This actually will be written as S-CoA, okay, S-CoA, and it gets used up. But this CoA molecule, this coenzyme A, write it as CoA only. This coenzyme A is actually a carrier of the, you can say it is a carrier of the acetyl. It is a carrier of this acetyl group. Okay, it is a carrier of the acetyl group. Now the thing is, acetyl, this needs to be transported. It needs to be transported through the mitochondrial membranes. Okay, from the cytosol. So CoA is like a carrier molecule for the acetyl. All right. Now after this pyruvate oxidation has taken place. This is also known as link reaction, or this part, release of CO2, this part is also known as link reaction or transition reaction. All right, now it forms the acetyl CoA. This is the activated form of the pyruvate, right? Now this can undergo the TCA cycle or the Krebs cycle or citric acid cycle to form the carbon dioxide and the water, right? This is the final product. It's not like an intermediate organic acid that will undergo further oxidation. No, this is the final product. But this ethanol, lactate, these can actually be oxidized further to produce energies. All right, so CoASH, this is what I was talking about. This particular thing is known as link reaction. I'll tell you why it's called the link reaction when we come to the point. Or transition reaction. Okay, please note down. Link reaction or transition reaction actually happens in between glycolysis and TCA cycle. Okay, glycolysis and TCA cycle. It happens. Link reaction or transition reaction happens in between glycolysis and TCA cycle. That means it is like a bridge. Okay, it's like a bridge. Let me show you. Out here, see. Glucose is being converted into pyruvate, which is being activated to acetyl CoA by the use of SH-CoA right? And in the process your NAD is being reduced to NADH plus H2, H plus NADH plus 2H plus, and as a result what is being released? CO2 is being released. Yes, SH CoA, and what else you have to give? NAD plus you have to give. Okay, now the thing is, see, this is in the cytosol, the cytosolic region, which is nearer to the mitochondrial, you can say, membrane. All right, so what happens, this CoA molecule, SH-CoA molecule, actually is incorporated into the pyruvate. Okay, and a transporter molecule exists out here, which actually transports this entire complex out here. Acetyl CoA is actually formed in the cytosol itself, and then using the transporter, it is carried inside the mitochondria. Please keep noting down, take running hand notes. Okay, and whenever you have doubts, you please note it down and ask me. All right, so this particular reaction is actually known as the link reaction. So it is taking place after the glycolysis and before Krebs cycle. All right, so that's what I meant. All right, so let's get back to the out here. Yes, so see, NAD plus, this is the oxidized coenzyme, right? Oxidized coenzymes, and this is the reduced coenzymes. Right, so in this case you can see acetyl CoA is formed. Right, that undergoes the citric acid cycle or oxidative phosphorylation. The lactate and the ethanol formation, these reactions are very important, and I would like you to go please look them up. All right, and memorize them. Memorize the structure of pyruvate, 3 carbon compound. Of course, it is a carboxylic acid compound, so you can see the CO minus moiety out here. This is exactly what gets released as CO2 in your aerobic oxidation part. Whenever you have this aerobic oxidation part, the CO2 which is being released is actually this CO2 out here. Okay, CO2 out here. All right. So alcoholic fermentation is also important. So let's dive into the glycolysis. All right, so your entire glycolysis is has a total of 10 steps. So it's divided into 2 steps, or you can say 2 phases of the cycle, right? The first one is the preparatory phase, and the second is the payoff phase. So 5 reactions in the prep phase and 5 reactions in the payoff phase. So as the name suggests, prep phase is where the ATP is actually consumed, where the energy is actually consumed, and payoff phase is where the cell receives the, you can say, the energy, okay, or its salary at the end. All right, so as a result, you can say the preparatory phase is where the energy is being used up, the cell is putting in energy, and the payoff phase where it is producing the energy. All right, obviously the net ATP production is higher than the net ATP consumption. So yeah, that's about it. All right, so let's talk about the first step, that is the phosphorylation of the glucose, right? So why is this phosphorylation step used? Phosphorylation is obviously activating the glucose, right? It is being activated, glucose is being activated for the subsequent reactions. All right, so phosphorylation is oftentimes used for the process of activation. Now the one thing that I'd like to mention out here is ATP, when it gets converted into ADP, it actually uses Mg2 plus. Okay, Mg2 plus. This is the ion that it uses. Without Mg2 plus, it is impossible to convert ATP to ADP. All right, why I'm saying this is that the enzyme which is used out here, the hexokinase, which is written, the hexokinase, there is actually another sister, you can say a sister of this enzyme, another sister, which is the glucokinase. All right, glucokinase. So hexokinase is present in all cells of all organisms. All right, now hepatocytes, that means the liver cells in animals I'm talking about. Another form of, you can say, an isoenzyme of hexokinase is present, which is called hexokinase 4 or glucokinase. Okay, so in hepatocytes or in liver cells, In liver cells what happens? Hexokinase 4 or glucokinase. Glucokinase is the enzyme that is actually doing the first reaction, which is also called the priming reaction. Okay, priming meaning activating the glucose. All right. So I was saying that Mg2 plus is required for ATP to get converted into ADP. Now obviously hexokinase is using glucose as the substrate. Yes, it is using glucose as the substrate. So why do you need the ATP? ATP is actually the phosphoryl group donator. Yes, it is the phosphoryl group donator, right? To whom is it donating? It is donating to an acceptor nucleophile. It is donating it to an acceptor nucleophile. All right, nucleophile meaning nucleus loving. All right. So you know, these kinases, all right, kinases are actually a subclass of transferases. Transferases is one of the major 6 classes of the enzymes. All right. So the thing is, the acceptor, the nucleophilic acceptor in the case of hexokinase is a hexose. Obviously normally it is the D-glucose, right? So this D-glucose is the nucleophilic acceptor of what? Of the phosphoryl group that the ATP is carrying. Okay, but hexokinase won't be active without Mg2 plus. Okay, because the true substrate of the enzyme, along with the glucose, of course, it's not ATP 4 minus, it is actually ATP Mg2 plus. ATP 4 minus and Mg2 plus. So net, how much will you get? Mg ATP 2 minus complex. Yes. So Mg ATP 2 minus complex plus the nucleophilic phosphoryl acceptor, which is your hexose, in this case the glucose. Okay, this will actually both of these together will act on hexokinase or glucokinase. Okay, glucokinase, and as a result they will produce the glucose 6 phosphate. Okay, this is the first step. All right. Now isozymes, you know what isozymes are? Isozymes are basically enzymes which are synthesized by different genes. Okay, they are synthesized by different genes in different regions of a particular body only, but they catalyze the same reaction. Those are called isozymes. So you can write down the definition of an isozyme: 2 enzymes that catalyze the same reaction but are encoded in different genes. Okay, they are called isozymes. Okay, different genes, different reaction sites, but same, you can say, reaction is being carried out. All right, I hope this is clear to you. Now the second reaction is the conversion of glucose 6 phosphate to fructose 6 phosphate. Yes, so this is carried out by an enzyme called phosphohexose isomerase, as you can see out here, phosphohexose isomerase, right, or phosphoglucose isomerase in this case, right? And you can see that the first reaction was an irreversible reaction, the second is a reversible reaction. Okay, now whenever some process is reversible, that means the delta G will be very small. The delta G involved will be very small, relatively small change in standard free energy. All right. Now, why is this isomerization needed? It is needed because it has a critical role in the overall glycolytic pathway. Okay, that means the rearrangement of the carbon and hydroxyl group at C1, you can see out here the rearrangement of the carbon at C1 and C2. It is a necessary step to the next 2 steps. Alright, it is a necessary steps in the next 2 steps. As you can see out here, in the first carbon you have CH2OH in the fructose 6 molecule, but out here you have HCH. Alright, so this particular change is absolutely important. This is absolutely important. C1 and C2, these changes are absolutely important. Okay, so you can write it down. Rearrangement of the carbonyl and hydroxyl groups at C1 and C2. Okay, what is the overall you can say need for this isomerization reaction? You need to rearrange the carbonyl and hydroxyl groups at C1 and C2. It is a very important point. I hope that you're pausing the video and you're writing them down. Alright. Step 3, this step 3, which is the second priming reaction, as you can see, another phosphate addition is taking place. Alright, and another ATP molecule is being consumed. Again, Mg2 plus has to be complexed with ATP so that the Mg ATP2 minus complex can be formed. Okay, ATP has a net of 4 negative charges owing to the phosphoryl oxygen atoms attached to the phosphoryl group, right? Now when it complexes with Mg2 plus, the net charge on the entire Mg ATP complex is 2 minus. This is important to understand. Alright, and it to get in the first reaction, Mg ATP 2 plus 2 minus and glucose, both of these together act as the substrates of the hexokinase enzyme. Alright, now the second priming reaction, which involves the another phosphoryl group attachment. Alright, this step is again another priming reaction. It is one of the priming reactions in glycolysis, right? And what is the enzyme that is used? The PFK1. There's a reason why it's called PFK1, because there is another analog of PFK, which is called PFK2, which is used up in the another pathway. Alright, it has different regulatory mechanisms. Okay, so we'll be talking about it when we will be doing the further lessons. For now, it is phosphofructokinase 1. Okay, now what happens in this case? Your fructose 1,6 bisphosphate is formed. Yes, your fructose 1,6 bisphosphate is formed. Let's talk about what happens in plants. Out here there's a slight difference out here. Some bacteria and protists, alright, and almost all the plants, they have a phosphofructokinase that uses pyrophosphate. Do you know what pyrophosphate is? PPI, pyrophosphate. Okay, PPI, but not ATP, not ATP, not ATP, but PPI. Alright, it is one of the inorganic phosphates as the phosphoryl group donor. Okay, in the synthesis of this fructose 1,6 bisphosphate. Okay, that is being targeted for your glycolysis. Alright, now it is this point, this enzyme phosphofructokinase is actually a major point of regulation in entire glycolytic pathway. Okay, the activity of PFK1 is increased whenever cells ATP supply is increased. That means ATP is a positive regulator of, it is a positive regulator or a promoter of PFK1. To talk about PFK2, this PFK2 enzyme, what it does is that PFK2, it catalyzes the formation of fructose 2,6 bisphosphate instead of fructose 1,6 bisphosphate. So you can write that down as well. Alright, so you might also notice that fructose 1,6 bisphosphate enzyme, the enzyme involved is phosphofructokinase 1. Fructose 1,6 bisphosphate, phosphofructokinase 1, and fructose 2,6 bisphosphate is phosphofructokinase 2. Okay, so the first position of the phosphate is actually denoted in the phosphofructokinase suffix, that is 1, 2. Alright, so I hope what I'm trying to say, that is clear to you. Alright, so I already told that in some plants and many bacteria and protists, instead of using your ATP, they use the inorganic phosphate, pyrophosphate, right, PPI. Okay, so phosphofructokinase is a major regulatory enzyme. Of course, it is a major regulatory enzyme and it is a major point of regulation in the entire glycolytic pathway, right? To talk about the activity of fructose 1,6 bisphosphate, this fructose 1,6 bisphosphate, this is actually a very important precursor, because from here only you get the glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Now glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate happens after the cleavage of the fructose 1,6 bisphosphate occurs, right? And the enzyme involved is an aldolase. It is an aldolase, right? It is an aldolase. So it catalyzes the aldol condensation reactions. That is why it's called an aldolase. So number 4, the reaction which is happening out here is the aldol, of course reversible. So it is a reversible aldol condensation. Okay, in chemistry you might read about aldol condensation, or if you have SK Sanyal or any major organic chemistry books, you can just look it up, aldol condensation. Okay, now as a result, the cleavage, CC cleavage is happening in this particular, you can say, reaction, right? Aldol condensation reaction. So you get two compounds, one is glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, another one is DHAP, right? Dihydroxyacetone phosphate, right? Both of them are phosphate compounds, and both of them have 3 carbon in each. Yes, and of course their standard change in the free energy of the reaction is very, very small. That is why it is a reversible reaction. Okay, so there is actually a metal metal cofactor which is used by aldolase, that is zinc, Zn2+. So you can note it down. All right, this Zn2+ is required to create the intermediate of aldol condensation reaction. Okay, that is enolate intermediate. Okay, now let's talk about the next step, which is your glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate 2, which is your glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate 2 1,3 bisphosphoglycerate. Now DHAP does not undergo the glycolysis pathway. Okay, glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate only will undergo the glycolysis pathway. All right, DHAP will actually just get interconverted into glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. DHAP is one of the products of the aldol condensation, but then it gets isomerized into glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, and then it moves on into the further payoff phase. All right, so you can see that two molecules of glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. From now on, for 2 molecules of glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, we will be studying our entire this particular pathway. All right, so the 6th enzyme which converts the glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate into the 1,3 bisphosphoglycerate, right, 1,3 BPG, is which enzyme? Number 6, glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate dehydrogenase, right? This is the dehydrogenase enzyme. And what is the enzyme that takes this particular thing? The 5th enzyme. 5th enzyme is the triose phosphate isomerase. This isomerizes dihydroxyacetone phosphate into glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate so that it can undergo the glycolytic pathway. All right. So the payoff phase will yield the ATP and the NADH. Right, ATP is the direct energy currency and NADH is the second energy currency. Right, both of them have energies stored in their bonds. Yes, so the payoff phase, the first reaction that we are studying is 1,3 bisphosphoglycerate, that formation of 1,3 bisphosphoglycerate from glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. So if you look at it properly, 2 energy conserving reactions are actually present. 2 energy conserving reactions are actually present in glycolysis, right? 2. So this is one of them. Okay, this is one of them. All right, glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate to 1,3 bisphosphoglycerate. Now you can see in the structure out here that it has an aldehydic group. Yes, this structure, glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, is actually an aldehyde, so it has an CHO group out here. Yes, now this aldehyde group of the glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate is obviously oxidized. It is oxidized because out here you can see there is COO. Yes, immediately you might think that it is first oxidized to a carboxylic acid intermediate. No, it is not oxidized to a free carboxyl group. It is actually oxidized to an anhydride group. Okay, it is actually oxidized to an anhydride and after that the phosphorylation occurs. After oxidation the phosphorylation will occur. Okay, so you can see in this case NAD plus is being reduced. NAD plus is the oxidized coenzyme, it is being reduced. So this is a redox reaction overall. Yes, this particular forward direction is obviously redox reaction. Yes, and in this case the NAD plus is being reduced to NADH, and in the process your oxidation of the glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate is being taking place, and along with oxidation the phosphorylation is also taking place. Please note, in here you have two phosphates which are being used up. Two phosphates which are being used up. Okay, two phosphates are being used up in this case. Okay, 2p. Okay, that means you can use the PPI also. You can use the inorganic phosphate out here. You can use the inorganic phosphate out here. Yes, because ultimately in the net production you have only 1p. 2p is being used because two molecules of glyceraldehyde 3 phosphates are there. That is why it is said 2p. Alright, and 2 NAD plus. So for one molecule, one phosphate will be used and one NAD plus will be used. Alright, next is 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate. This particular thing will now be converted into the 3-phosphoglycerate, and in the process your ATP production is going to take place. This is the first ATP forming reaction, right? It's the first ATP forming reaction. In here also energy is stored, no? NADH, in NADH also energy will be stored. Okay, and in the form of ATP at two places your energy will be released. So this is one of the places. Alright, now the thing is phosphoryl transfer from 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate, okay, happens from 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate to ADP. That means the phosphate which was present in the bisphosphoglycerate is being taken up by ADP to yield your ATP, right? What is the enzyme used out here? It is the phosphoglycerate kinase enzyme, the phosphoglycerate kinase enzyme. Right, now kinase, as you know, it is a transferase. It is a subclass of transferase. Kinases are basically transferases enzymes. Transferase meaning some groups are being transferred between a product and a reactant. Alright, so in this case also the phosphate group is being transferred. Alright, now as you can see in this particular case, overall reaction is becoming exergonic now. Okay, overall reaction is becoming exergonic now, because see out here glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate is being converted into 1,3 bisphosphoglycerate and then to 3-phosphoglycerate. So overall this and this combined, this step, I mean the 6th and the 7th step, the 7th step is irreversible reaction. You can see the 7th step is an irreversible reaction. That means it is a high standard free energy change. Alright, that means you cannot compensate for the energy change which is occurring out here. So if I want to inform you about the energy changes, at this 7th step the free energy change is actually near about minus 18.5 kilojoule per mole. Okay, for the 7th step. Okay, for the 7th step the net energy release is 18.5 kilojoule per mole, and for the 6th step you are requiring a plus 6.3 kilojoule per mole. 6.3 kilojoule per mole. Since this is a small value, that is why still the reversible thing was happening, but then it is plus. Okay, it is a plus. Delta G value, delta G naught in the biochemical reactions, this is how you represent. Okay, biochemical change in Gibbs free energy. So it is denoted by delta G naught 1. Alright, delta G naught dash. So this is plus 6.3 kilojoule per mole. Alright, and out here in the 7th step there is minus 18 kilojoule, minus 18.5 kilojoule per mole. Okay, 18.5 or 3 was it? 18.5 kilojoule per mole. Alright, so combining these 6th and 7th step, you can see that there is a net minus 12.5 kilojoule per mole. per mole. So this is the net energy change, and it is exergonic. So overall it needs to be exergonic. No, it needs to be exergonic. This is a formation, this is a process for the formation of your energy, so it needs to be exergonic. Okay, all right. So in this 7th and the 8th steps, okay, the 7th and the 8th steps, these are actually called coupled reactions. Coupled reactions, these kind of coupled reactions is a major study of the field of bioenergetics. Okay, okay. In fact, the ATP formation is also a coupled reaction. In a coupled reaction, one of the reaction is endothermic and the other is exothermic, but it is so much exothermic, okay, the second reaction is so much exothermic that the exothermic or exergonic, whatever you might like to call it, okay, that the ultimately when you look at it, combining both the reactions, the reaction becomes exergonic. That means it becomes spontaneous. All right, exergonic reactions are spontaneous, where delta G values are less than 0 or negative. Yes, so yeah, that's about it. The ninth step, 7th till 7th we have done now. Okay, the 8th step, it is the involving the enzyme called phosphoglycerate mutase. Right, now please note that these enzymes, most of them are membrane bound enzymes. All right, most of them are membrane bound enzymes. Okay, so most of them are membrane bound enzymes. Now phosphoglycerate mutase, right, it catalyzes a, you can see this number 8 reaction is actually a reversible reaction, so obviously its delta G naught dash is going to be very very small. In fact, it is 4.4 kilojoule per mole. Okay, 4.4 positive, 4.4 kilojoule per mole. All right, so the first couple reaction we saw, it was between the 6th and the 7th step, right? The payoff phase started with the 6th reaction, and 6th and the 7th, they were the coupled reactions, making the net resultant as an exergonic reaction with an energy production of minus 12.5 kilojoule per mole. Now we are studying the 8th reaction, which is conducted by the phosphoglycerate mutase, and it also has a delta G naught dash of 4.4 kilojoule per mole, and hence it is reversible because it is a small value. All right, now for this phosphoglycerate mutase also, for this 8th number enzyme also, you need Mg2 plus. You need a complex formation with Mg2 plus, otherwise the reaction will not be taking place. All right, so Mg2 plus being a cofactor of the phosphoglycerate mutase, it converts it into the 2-phosphoglycerate. All right, 2-phosphoglycerate or 2PG. Okay, so still the 3 carbon these are what? These are 3 carbon compounds. All of them are 3 carbon compounds. The end product will be also a 3 carbon compound, right? Now the thing is there is actually an intermediate taking place between 3 and 2 phosphoglycerate. All right, the intermediate is actually 2,3 BPG. 2,3 BPG, as you know, it is a regulator of the hemoglobin affinity for the phosphoryl groups. Okay, we'll be taking it up later on, but this hemoglobin, it has a major role to play as an effector molecule in the regulation of affinity of hemoglobin for your, you can say indirectly, the oxygen only. Okay, so this is very important. Okay, so the phosphoglycerate mutase, this reaction is very important. Now let's talk about the 9th step. The 9th step is the reaction from 2-phosphoglycerate to phosphoenol pyruvate, PEP. Right, in photosynthesis you studied the PEP. PEP was the starting product in your which pathway, do you remember? PEP was getting used up in which pathway? You will revise this particular thing. Okay, PEP carboxykinase was being used, right? Okay, all right. Okay, next, phosphoenol pyruvate, the PEP molecule is actually a high energy molecule. Okay, it is a high energy molecule, and the 9th enzyme is the enolase reaction. right? And you can see water is being removed in the process. 2 molecules of water, 1 molecule per 1 glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate that we had taken in the beginning is being released. Yes, yes. So this particular PEP, okay, this is this PEP actually has a high potential for the transfer of this phosphate group. In proper terms, if you want to say, it is a compound with high phosphoryl group transfer potential. High phosphoryl group transfer potential, you can write that down. Alright, obviously this thing has to be spontaneous, and spontaneous, so much spontaneous that energy will be released in the process. So this has to be a high energy product, HEP. If you notice out here, 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate, this was also a high energy product. Okay, out here you can see, which I missed out here, is 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate to 3-phosphoglycerate. This was actually the first ATP formation reaction, and this was substrate level phosphorylation. Okay, substrate level phosphorylation is the formation of ATP. Okay, formation of ATP is taking place, right? So it is obviously your phosphorylation will you can understand why it's called phosphorylation. But why is it called substrate level? It is called substrate level, right? It is called substrate level because it involves soluble enzymes. Alright, so the 7th enzyme, the phosphoglycerate kinase enzyme, is actually a soluble enzyme. Okay, and the chemical intermediate used in this case, which is a high energy product, is the 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate. The high energy product are actually characterized by the presence of the phosphoanhydride bonds, which are easily breakable and highly exergonic. So PEP and 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate, 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate and PEP, these two are the high energy products in your entire glycolytic pathway. Alright, now the last part is the 10th reaction, which is the pyruvate kinase. Okay, so this pyruvate kinase actually requires K plus, it requires Mg2 plus, of course. It requires Mg2 plus. Instead of Mg2 plus, if there is a dearth of Mg2 plus, Mn2 plus can also be used. Alright, but apart from that, K plus is also used. Alright, these are the cofactors of the enzyme pyruvate kinase. Okay, obviously the product appearing out here is the pyruvate. This is also a substrate level phosphorylation. This is also a what? It is a phosphate substrate level phosphorylation. Okay, initially the product pyruvate, it appears in its enol form. So you must know about the ketoenol tautomerism, right? Ketoenol tautomerism. So that is exactly what happens. Firstly, pyruvate is occurring in its enol form. Okay, and it is rapidly rearranged into your pyruvate molecule. Ketoenol tautomerism is also known as what? It is known as 1,3H migration. Okay, 1,3H migration. That means the hydrogen is transferred between the first and the third carbons in the compound. There's a specific way of numbering these carbons. When you will be studying the chemistry part of ketoenol tautomerism in your GOC, please ask your teacher to just explain what 1,3H migration is. Alright, so yeah, the phosphoenol pyruvate, firstly it changes into the enol form, gets converted into the enol form of pyruvate, and then it rapidly gets converted into the you can say the keto form. Alright, keto form is the more stable form, obviously. That is why the final product, that is the pyruvate, is obtained in the keto form. Actually, in majority of the cases, the keto form is the stable form. There are very rare cases where the enol form is the most stable form. Alright, so obviously again coupling of the reaction occurs between this. You can say which reactions the coupling will occur. Any idea in this case? The last reaction out here, that means the 10th reaction, is actually a very high highly exergonic reaction, minus 31.4 kilojoule per mole. The last reaction. the ninth reaction out here has a net delta G naught prime of 7.5 kilojoule per mole. 7.5 kilojoule per mole. Of course, I have not memorized these values, but then I have an idea. Alright, I have an idea. So you can see 8th, 9th, even if you sum it up, okay, it is not going to be greater than 15 kilojoule. But in the third step, there is the net energy is minus 31.4 kilojoule per mole. Okay, so these two reactions, even if they are in a way they are having positive Gibbs free energy change, they are happening. Okay, the delta G naught prime is greater than 0. Even then these reactions are happening, because the cell knows that at the end you will have this 10th reaction, which is actually going to compensate for all the energy differences that have been created out here. Okay, so overall there is a net gain of around minus 15.5 kilojoule per mole. Okay, so no worries for the cell. Alright, no worries for the cell. Okay, so that's about it. I hope this entire glycolysis pathway is explained to you properly. Now this particular chart will be taking up in the next class. This is actually the glycolysis feeder pathway. Okay, that means the different pathways which actually feeds into the glycolysis pathway. Okay, so we'll be taking it up. I hope you enjoyed the class, and we will having the next class from the scheduled timing. Thank you so much.